Good morning, dear students. I hope everybody is fine and staying safe. Today I brought an interesting lecture on the topic lubricants. The lubricants are one of the important substances used in the engineering application. In this lecture, we are going to see the introduction part of the lubricants, the various objectives of the lubricants, what are the main functions of the lubricants, and the different type of the lubrication phenomena, that is mechanism of the lubricants. What is the learning outcome? After finishing the lecture, students will be able to understand about the lubricant substances, their objectives, functions, and the mechanism of the lubrication, including the three types of the mechanism, that is hydrodynamic, boundary film, and extreme pressure. To understand the lubricant substances, we should know what is friction. The friction is any force that resists the motion, or we can say it's an opposing force by the surface where the external force is applied. So here you are able to see that the two surfaces are contact to one another. The upper surface is in contact with the lower surface. So when an external force is applied to slide the upper surface over the lower surface, the resistance produced by this lower surface, and that resistance force is called frictional force. Understood? And it arises due to the contact points. Here you can able to see the points which come in contact between these two surfaces produces that opposing force which is called friction. Friction is a necessary evil. Why it is said? Friction is necessary because without the friction we cannot think about our survival of life. We are walking due to the friction. We are writing on the board, it is also due to the friction. The brakes of the vehicles function because of friction. If the friction is not there, the thing which is start cannot stop. But it is an evil where in the application, the major engineering application, in the machines, in the automobile, it acts as an evil because various drawbacks of the excessive friction causes the damage to the part of the machine and decrease the efficiency of the machine. So there it is having the drawback. So the drawbacks, or we can say the disadvantages of the excessive friction in that application: it decreases the efficiency of the machine, it causes wear and tear of the machine, wear tear of the different parts in the machine. If any of one part in the machine is damaged, then it disturbs the whole working of the machine. It causes loss of energy which turns into the heat energy. And the heat energy can reaches to the melting point of the metal surface, leads to the formation of junctions on the surface. So that is also one of the big drawback or the disadvantage of the excessive friction. So to minimize all these drawbacks and to increase the efficiency of the machine, we must require such substances which are applied over moving, sliding or the rolling surface. That substances are called lubricants. So what are lubricants? We can easily define now. Lubricants are those substances which are used to reduce the frictional force between two sliding surfaces, moving surfaces or rolling surfaces, to minimize the frictional force, frictional resistance which arises between the two moving, sliding or the rolling surfaces. There is a necessary of using such substances that are called lubricants. What are the objective of the lubrication? To reduce the frictional resistance between the surfaces, to reduce the wear on the bearing surfaces, to protect the bearing surfaces from the corrosion, to carry away the heat from the bearing, to reduce the noise from the moving components of the machine. So these are the objectives why the lubricants are necessary substances to use in the machines. Now we discuss the various functions of the lubricant. The first and the foremost function of the lubricant is to reduce the frictional resistance or the frictional force which arises between the two moving, sliding or the rolling surfaces. So that is the one of the most necessity of the substances to be used in such application to reduce the frictional resistance. The other function of the lubricants are cooling. It absorbs the heat which is released due to the excessive friction. That is also called frictional heat. It also minimizes the noise of a moving machine. When the machine runs and excessive friction arises, the voice and the unwanted sound comes out which result into the noise. So the lubricant minimizes this noise of a moving machine. It acts as a seal. This is again an important function of a lubricant. It prevents the leakage of the gases under the high pressure and the temperature. So it prevents the leakage of the gases there. So it acts as the seal also, its function. It protects the wear and tear as well as corrosion. By seeing all the functions of the lubricant, we cannot say only to reduce the frictional resistance or the frictional force between the surfaces. It acts as a coolant also, it acts as a seal also, it minimizes the pollution also, it prevents wear, tear, corrosion also. Very, very important substances to be used in the application. So how it reduces the frictional resistance or the force between the surface? The surface is having many irregularities. Here you can see in the picture, the irregularity is in the form of peak, that is mountains, which is called peak, and depressions are called valley. So these are the irregularity present in the surface. We can say in the smooth surface, these irregularity is less as compared to the rough surface. In the rough surface, the irregularity can be seen by the naked eye. But if we talk about smooth surface also, they are having the irregularities. So when two surfaces come in contact, these irregularity actually come in contact. And when the peaks and the valley comes to the contact with the another peak and valleys, this is the first surface and the another surface is this. So what happened? When they go for coming contact to one another, it locked, these irregularity lock to one another, and this how it produces excessive friction there. Interlocking takes place. This is called interlocking of the irregularities. So to minimize this interlocking, we provide the lubricant between these irregularities so that it do not come to contact with each other. So irregularity present on the surface which produce the friction, we apply the lubricant which fills these irregularity and make it smooth to become frictionless. This how it reduces the friction. We are applying the lubricants between these surfaces which fill out to these irregularity and minimize the friction. This how it plays the role. The next function is the cooling function. The lubricant reduce the friction between the two parts and avoid the production of the heat energy and remain the machine cool by absorbing the heat released by the friction of the two parts or two surfaces. So it carried away the heat from that part and make the machine cool by absorbing the heat. So it acts as a coolant. The noise reduction, by preventing the metal to the metal contact, lubricant avoid the noise by making a layer between them. So as the contact reduces between the surfaces or the irregularities, the noise is also reduces. It acts as a seal where in the internal combustion engine it is applied between the cylinder and the piston where it prevents the leakage of the gases under high temperature and the pressure. So it acts as a seal also. This is a very important function of IC engine of the lubricants. After understanding the important functions of the lubricant, we should learn about the lubrication phenomena. What is lubrication phenomena? Applying of the lubricants between the two moving, sliding and the rolling surfaces is called lubrication. And we can understand the lubrication by its mechanism. So there are three types of the mechanism of the lubrication. The one is hydrodynamic, which is also called fluid film or thick film lubrication. The second one is the thin film or the boundary film lubrication. And the third one is the extreme pressure lubrication. What is the thick film or the hydrodynamic lubrication or the fluid film lubrication? In this mechanism, we apply a thick layer of the lubricant of at least 1000 Armstrong thick between the two moving or the sliding surfaces. If we go for applying at least this thickness of the layer between the surfaces, this type of the mechanism is called thick film. So as the name is also indicating, that thick film will really remind us that the at least 1000 Armstrong thick layer is introduced between the two surfaces. Now, this thick layer of the lubricant can be provided by which lubricant? The suitable lubricant to apply this thickness layer is the hydrocarbon oil. So, for the thick film lubrication or the hydrodynamic lubrication, the hydrocarbon oils are used. But its viscosity should remain same in all the seasons, because we all know in the summers the temperature is high, when the viscosity depend on the temperature. As increasing the temperature, the viscosity decreases. If it happens, what happen? Your oil squeeze out between the surfaces, so it do not play the role of reducing the friction. So to maintain the viscosity in all the seasons, hydrocarbon oil is blended with the long chain polymers. Understood? So this is to be done if we are going to have this type of the mechanism, thick film or the hydrodynamic lubrication. Now one more problem occurs using the hydrocarbon oil, because hydrocarbon oil consists of the saturated as well as unsaturated hydrocarbon. Saturated having the single bonds and the unsaturated double and the triple bonds. So unsaturated hydrocarbon have the tendency to readily oxidize and convert to the other gummy products. So if it happens, it leads to the formation of gummy products which minimize the function of the lubricant. So addition of the antioxidants also done to prevent the oxidation of unsaturated hydrocarbons. So addition of antioxidants as well as long chain polymers are done in the hydrocarbon oil, and then it is used in the mechanism. This type of the mechanism supports high speed and low load. In such of the application when the speed is high and the load is low, this type of the mechanism works out. That's why it is used in the lighter machines like sewing machine, watches, clocks, delicate instruments, scientific instruments. Understood? So these are the application of this type of the mechanism where we can use thick film lubrication. We can use thick film lubrication in the lighter machines where the speed is high, load is less. There we can easily use this type of mechanism. Here you can able to see in the picture also, we have a thick layer. This is the thick layer introduced between these two surfaces. This is the upper layer, this is the lower layer. So this is the lubricant molecules having the thickness of at least 1000 Armstrong. So this can be introduced where we have a space around the parts. If we have the space, we can easily introduce this thick layer between the surfaces and we can use this mechanism. After the thick film lubrication, the next mechanism is the boundary film, or it can be said thin film lubrication. As the name is indicating, thin film or the boundary film, where the space is very less to apply such a thick layer as seen before in the thick film lubrication. So we go for applying a thin layer of the lubricant there where the space is less, and it supports high load. It supports high load and low speed. It is applied in the application where the load is very heavy or it is high and the speed is less. So in such application, this type of mechanism is suitable. So the boundary film lubrication or the thin film lubrication comes into the play when the thick film lubrication fails. I have told you where the space is not enough to apply a thick layer of the lubricant in the machine, we can use the thin film lubrication or the boundary film lubrication. And it supports the heavy load and the speed is slow. The viscosity of the oil is low to apply the thin layer. So that will be the mechanism called thin film lubrication. The boundary film lubrication is the lubrication in which the lubricant film is very small between the two surfaces in contact. We have seen that the thin film lubrication is having the very thin layer of the lubricant between the surfaces. The lubricant get absorbed over the metal surfaces by the physical or the chemical forces. Absorbed over the surface, either the physical force or the chemical force, it prevents the friction. The metal layer avoid the metal to the metal forces. So it always supports the heavy load and the speed should be less. The applications where we can use this type of mechanism are rollers, tractors. It is very useful to use this type of mechanism in this application. So the difference between the thick film and thin film, we can have to better understand. The thick film, apply a thick layer of at least 1000 Armstrong, which can be used in an appropriate space between the surfaces. But if the spaces are not such enough to use thick film, we can use the thin film lubrication. So suitable lubricants for the boundary film or the thin film lubrication are, we can select any one of the lubricant to be used in this mechanism. The solid lubricants. The solid lubricants we can use graphite, molybdenum disulfide. We can also use vegetable and the animal oils. And we can also use for this type of the mechanism mineral oil with the proper additives. We can add some of the fatty acids to improve the stickiness or the oiliness to stick over the surface and can be applied between the surfaces. So the suitable lubricants can, any one kind of the lubricant we can use for this mechanism. The next mechanism is the extreme pressure lubrication. When the conditions are on the extreme level, as we have seen in the thick film lubrication, when the speed is high and the load is low, it works. And the thin film supports the heavy load and the speed should be low. But the speed should be also high, the load is also high, the temperature is also high. So it comes in the extreme conditions. So in the extreme conditions, neither the thick film lubrication can function, neither the thin film lubrication function out, because if we go for using the lubricants which we have seen in the thick film and thin film, it undergo evaporation and also the decomposition. So in such extreme condition, we should use the extreme pressure lubrication. When the moving surfaces are working under very high pressure and the high temperature, the ordinary liquid lubricants either vaporizes or decomposes. So in such cases, this mechanism works out. What we do in this mechanism, special additives are added along with some liquid lubricants which is having the active functional groups. For example, the chlorinated esters, sulfurized oils, triglyceryl phosphate. They are having the active functional group like chlorine in chlorinated esters, the sulfur in sulfurized oils, and the phosphorus in triglyceride phosphate. So what these groups perform? These groups forms the metallic chlorides, sulfides and phosphides compound, which is having a very high melting point. That's why it forms a durable film across the surface. So it do not decompose, it do not evaporate, and under extreme condition the lubricant perform its function. So this is called the extreme pressure lubrication. So when the conditions are at the extreme level, that is high temperature, high pressure, and we cannot go for using thick film and thin film lubricants, such kind of the lubricant with the proper additives are used having the active functional groups like chlorine, sulfur and phosphorus. They just react with the metal to form metallic chlorides, sulfides and phosphides, which is having the high melting point. So these are the three types of the mechanism of the lubrication. In the next lecture, we are going to learn the classification of the lubricants, the available lubricants and the properties of the lubricants. Thank you and take care.